Q Logistics is a global freight forwarder focused on the Asia to USA import supply chain. Q Logistics is a boutique service-centric provider with core expertise in ocean and air imports into the United States of America, customs brokerage, and warehousing and logistics. They offer seamless, flexible, and simple international transportation solutions. And last but not least, 5C70 Design, a veteran and first responder founded apparel production company providing embroidery, print, and full product fulfillment for the brands that they stand with. 5C70 Design partners with brands to deliver quality apparel, managing both large and small orders with the same level of precision, reliability, and attention to detail.
We were all frustrated at that point because you just took a place that was being engaged. Yes, it was called cold, 8 killed, but guess what? 2 didn't die. And so you still have 2 enemies that are essentially could turn around and open fire again on these men. They're still considered hostile. And the fact that we weren't able to engage them, that was what I think infuriated us the most, because they're still combatants. You know, it's not like they're standing there with a white flag, waving it, you know, or hands up, sorry, you know. Now they're running away. So we're watching them as they keep leaving the target area. You know, we're calling out 1 click away, you know, whatever. And as they're moving, they start bounding, which is a tactical movement. You know, they'd wait, 1 would go, the other one would follow. And so then they start knocking on doors when they start getting to the area where there's houses. And when they stopped to knock on doors, more people would come out. So now we have a force that's gaining personnel. We went from 2 to then 4 to then 6, and then eventually it was 12. So when it came to be 12 people, the Apaches had to refuel, and they were still overhead, the Army Rangers. So when they needed to refuel, we had to go provide close air support for the Rangers. And when we did that, an ISR element had to come over and basically take over watching the 12 for us. So from that point on, you know, we're just kind of like waiting for the Apaches to get back. The Apaches come back, then we go back over to the 12. But in that moment, the ISR platform says, sorry, we lost chain of custody. We don't know where they went. And when you lose chain of custody, you can't say for sure who's who, right? Because now you can't track them. You can't say that, yeah, they're right there. To my knowledge, I think that there were a few other things in the stack, but we didn't have access to them and we didn't know. So this is where a lot of, you know, people start butting heads about what happened that night, because obviously when you lose eyes on those 12, that's when it's a wrap. Sorry, mission's over. You know, anyways, your target is not there anyhow, you know. They called it a dry hole. That's what they call it when, you know, you don't find who's there, who you're looking for. You know, the capture kill mission is no longer. And we took the coordinates down of where we thought that these 12 could have went, because there was movement around some buildings. And there were some long cylindrical objects, which we couldn't say for sure because you can't ID from the elevation or altitude that we were at. So in that point in time, you know, we're just thinking follow on target at best for the next day, couple days, whatever, you know, figure out who's there, hit it then. And so we're getting ready to go overhead the Rangers for exfil because they're calling for an exfil. And all of a sudden we hear QRF, stand by for QRF. And we're like, what the hell for? Like, what are they talking about? QRF is like, to us, it's always advertised as like, everyone's pinned down, no one has any ammunition, holy smokes, you know, the end of the world's happening, you know, or whatever. And so, like, we don't even know if the dude that they're looking for, I mean, supposedly he wasn't even on the target, you know? He had left like the day before or hours before. So now we're just like scrambling because we're trying to say, okay, this doesn't make any sense. This is a surface to air fire tragedy situation. Like, do not send anybody in. Knock it off is what we're supposed to say when things don't make sense in combat or in peacetime, you know? And everybody was saying it from every different radio and aspect that we could, and nobody was listening to us. And so then
Wow.
that's
So when that QRF call came out, that was basically signaling that, hey, an American aircraft has just been struck. It's downed. Now we need to call in a QRF to see if we can recover our forces. Was that what had happened? The QRF call came out after Extortion was hit, or did fire start? That's when the QRF call came out and then the aircraft was hit. What was the
so
vantage point from the air?
so this is where it gets confusing, right? Like, a lot of people were told a lot of different things. And I think that,
Which is why we're still having this conversation today, all these years later,
right,
right?
right. And, whatever you thought you knew, just stand by, because I think that when the Army Rangers called for an exfil, nothing was happening. And that's when the QRF was called, because somebody was bored, in my mind. Somebody got bored because there wasn't enough stuff going on around that time frame. I don't remember what religious holiday or whatever it could have been over there, because, sometimes there isn't enough stuff happening in the month of, I think it's July or beginning of, I can't remember. But anyway, it was boring, apparently. Like, when I got there, stuff was happening, and then there was kind of a lull. And then when August hit, there were some more missions going on, but that night in particular, it didn't seem like anything special to me. Like, it was like, all right, sweet, wrap this up, exfil, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to get some pancakes. Like, I was already like there. I was going, I was ready. I was like, okay, like, I have, the rest of my night and morning. So when the QRF was called, it was for that follow on. Like, the mission that we thought could have been the next day, they were making it that night. Like, it was important that they got to roll up on whoever was there to see what was going on, which, again, to me, didn't equate to a QRF mission. But, I wasn't in charge, obviously. And so what I saw, what I was feeling was, we have got to stop them from coming in. And again, like, someone was hell-bent on that mission and said, no, we're sending them in. So we didn't have a call sign. We didn't have a heading. Our navigator made contact with the JTAC that was on the helo that left the fob that you were at. And, that night, we didn't know that everyone piled on the same CH-47, which was unprecedented, because every training that I've done, they say split up the crew, because you don't want to put everybody on the same aircraft, because if it gets shot down, everybody dies, or there's so many more injuries. There's no one to respond quickly to save people, to provide first aid, whatever it could be.
So I want to make sure that I am hearing you correctly and that the audience is discerning this correctly as well. So what I think I just heard you say was, while you were in the air, you realized that, wait a minute, they're putting everybody on one aircraft, or you realized that after the fact, once you got to the ground and like there was chaos?
After the fact. Yeah.
After the fact. And that immediately stood out as, wait, what? Time out. Say that again?
Right.
As something that we never do. Okay.
Right. So I was jumping ahead there a bit, but in that space, when our navigator contacted the JTAC on that helicopter that was still at the forward operating base, he said, stand by, we have a crew swap. And so, we're like thinking, what? Crew swap? I guess in that moment, they took 8 Terps, interpreters, Afghanis, took them off and put 8 others on. And I don't know if people understand how it works when we're in a combat zone, but we also train people that want to keep their country safe. And they're basically mercenaries for their own country, in a way. So we train them and they work with us. But for me, I never felt safe around them. I always felt like y'all got
Sure.
some cousins or something, you know. I just was always sketched out, even by the dining people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we called them back in the day, and this hopefully doesn't upset anybody, but TCNs, which was third country nationals that would work on our base, that would clean the bathrooms, serve the food, do the things. I mean, they would
Mm-hmm.
get paid to do these jobs, obviously a lot more than they were ever making if they ever made anything like in Afghanistan. So I think that, having to witness that these folks were being trained alongside of us, it always gave me this like very eerie feeling. And I didn't know at that point either. So I didn't know that everyone had piled onto the same aircraft, and I didn't know that 8 men got swapped out at the last minute.
Okay, so again, I want it to be very clear. So it sounds like there were Rangers on the ground operating, and like you said, there were bombs dropped on the battlefield on a group of individuals, and it turned out that once you were allowed back directly overhead, you realize, hey, there's still movement on the ground from these individuals that we just dropped bombs on. I want to engage. I want to re-engage these guys. You
Hmm.
weren't allowed to re-engage at that time, even though you knew that there was movement. And it sounds like someone made the decision that no, this is an important objective. Therefore, we're going to launch a QRF to go action this objective. And that QRF turned out to be a team of tier one operators
Right.
out of Naval Special Warfare.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, again, like maybe someone knew something more. Obviously, there's a possibility there. I didn't have control of the whole air stack that
Mm-hmm.
night. But what I did know is, again, no matter how much you know, you're flying into a place that's basically going to shoot an aircraft down or shoot at an aircraft for sure. That's low and
Because,
slow.
like you said, it was that red when you saw the overlay
Right.
of
Right.
the ground to air threat. You're like, oh no, for sure. Like they're at least going to shoot at the aircraft. You put aircraft
Right.
overhead in this area.
Right. I mean, historically, it showed like even from the week prior, this
Mm-hmm.
was known to be a hot zone, and to put anybody in there. I mean, again, like let's wait when it makes sense. There isn't these guys aren't in America. They're not like, you know, a sleeper cell or anything like that. They're just traveling back from Afghanistan and Pakistan. And how can we figure out the in between of how to pin these guys down? And I think that that's
Right.
where, for me, it didn't make sense because there wasn't a sense of urgency. Like,
Mm-hmm.
again, no one was being shot at. This could be easily a follow on mission, maybe not even in this area. Like, I mean, you have the ability to figure out where these guys are at, and I'm not going to say anything or how to do that, but, you know, this isn't their first rodeo on how to figure that out. But with all of that combined, I mean, it was already a tragedy in the making.
Sure. And so the decision is made that these tier one operators are going to launch to action this new objective. And so are you saying that right before they took off in Extortion 17, there was a decision that was made to swap out the interpreters that were already on the aircraft with, I think you said, 8 individuals that were Afghani operators? Did I hear that correctly?
They were probably also interpreters. We even
Right.
have record of that too. I mean, I have seen the redacted files that the parents were all given afterwards. And so there is record that that happened. And that's why it's just extremely, it's sad, you know, because we don't know
Hmm.
if those men that came off of the aircraft called back to whoever they know in that valley. Because, you know, again, that's where my suspicion, hypervigilance of just patterns, human behavior, anyways, comes into play. Trust but verify, you know? And for me,
Hmm. Hmm.
trying to trust those people that are from there, it's really hard for me to do that, you know? So I suspected the worst in the sense of, you know, my theory has always been that someone made the call that night to let them know where they were going because they already knew where they were headed and then they were taking
Hmm.
off that bird. And also, this is all after bin Laden had been killed. This is a couple months later. You know, this is
Right.
like basically for me, it's a 10-year anniversary of being able to strike back after 9/11. So there's a lot
Hmm.
of, you know, kind of hidden themes as well going on.
Now, do we know approximately how long, like how many minutes, was it an hour before Extortion 17 left Fob Shank that that group was switched out?
It was minutes because the JTAC said,
Minutes.
stand by, we have a crew swap.
Wow, so minutes. So with that being said, do we know if that flight manifest was formally changed before that aircraft left Fob Shank to go and action that target?
And you know what? I would have to do some digging for that too because I can't say that it was. Obviously, I wasn't on that fob, but yeah, these are all, again, like great questions in the aftermath of all this, right?
Is that normal, Joni, that minutes before an aircraft leaves a fob, that personnel are switched out and the amazing professionals flying and operating that aircraft are unsure as to whether they have an accurate flight manifest? Is that normal? Does that ever happen?
Not to my knowledge, but nothing about that night was normal, right? I mean, everybody was on the same aircraft. I mean, I don't even know if that was updated properly, you know? Did that was that the initial was that the intent, right? Like so that was fascinating to me. But again, this was a very dangerous zone to fly anything into. So the fact that you're trying to land two aircraft as opposed to one, I think that also had a lot to do with it too. And it was in kind of
Hmm.
a riverbed. We didn't know what we were dealing with. In August in Afghanistan, looked kind of marshy in some of the areas. And we were being force fed helo landing zones, by the way. So when we said, knock it off, let's, you know, not pursue this, then that's when we were being fed like all of these helo landing zone ideas. And I just remember like looking at my navigator and I'm like, this is so messed up. And I mean, they're forcing our hand. We can't say no. I mean, what are we going to do? Say, see you later. You know, they've relied on us to be there. So the quick reaction force was coming. And again, I only had one sensor that was actually able to clear everything. You know, we had the TV that can like stay in that spot. This is an antiquated, you know, airframe. This isn't like this anymore. So I'm not giving away any kind of secrets or nothing, you know. I think like to be with only one sensor because it's zero illumination, you're already fighting an uphill battle, especially with something like this in such a dangerous zone. So we find a helo landing zone, and we still don't know the direction that these guys are coming in from. And by the time we start to feel a little bit okay with how this mission could potentially go, that's when I hear the pilot say, "Hey, I got eyes on the helos." And so seconds later, he says, "Oh no, I think that they just got shot down." And the whole airplane went quiet.
Wow.
And we were just like, what the hell did he just say? That they got shot down? And so he takes control of the sensors. He says, trying to tell them where to go, because none of us, not even the sensor operators, know where to look. And so from there, we abandon the whole mission, obviously, because now the mission becomes the shoot down of Extortion 17. And as we're going overhead, I froze. I remember my body, I just froze up. I'm staring just into space. Like I was beside myself. And because this is my first deployment, and now we have a helicopter shot down. We've trained to this, sure. But in this moment, I was devastated, and then the navigator, I remember, slams his fist on the counter and he said, "Get out the checklist." And so I got out the checklist for Fallen Angel. And so he called Fallen Angel over the radio. And from that point forward, we took over as on-scene commander.
Wow. Yeah, I can remember that night very vividly. I was attached to the other Tier 1 National Mission Unit out of the same team, but operating out of Jalalabad. And we were the sister platoon or the sister troop of the troop that was aboard Extortion 17. I was actually on loan from SEAL Team 1 over to that troop at that Tier 1 unit. And that night felt like any other night. It was a normal night. Hey, we know that 2 troops going out, and so that means that we're the QRF. If they get in trouble, we're going to spin up. We're going to go out and help them. Just like on the nights when we went out, they were our QRF. If we got in trouble, they were going to fire up and come out and save our asses as well. And I remember, like you said, we slept all day. Because we sleep all day, we hunt all night. That's the vampire ship that we live on,
right,
in the military, specifically in the special operations community. And so I had gotten up a few hours before. The sun started setting, so it was time to wake up. Gone through all of my kit, gotten in a workout. It was a normal day. I knew that 2 troop was getting ready to go out. And I was in my uniform and all my kit was ready, but I was just chilling because we weren't planning to do anything unless 2 troop got in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so we were just on standby. And I was in my room in our hut at JBAD. And I remember I was laying in a bed watching some stupid show about medicine. It was something, I can't even remember what it was. It was some hospital show. And one of my buddies, another one of the operators, came by my room and he said, "Hey, we got to go to the ready room. Extortion 17 just got shot down." And I remember kind of looking up at him like, haha, very funny, but that's not funny, bro. It's not the kind of thing we joke about. And I remember him looking at me with this very grave look on his face and saying, like, he knew what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. And he just put his head down and went, "I'm not joking, bro. We got to go." And I'm hopping up out of the bed and sprinting over to the ready room with him in order to realize that, like, no, he's not joking. Something terrible just happened. And as I'm getting ready to walk up into the ready room, start donning my kit, I look over to the left and I see another one of my buddies, one of the operators from the troop, walking up, looking like he had just seen a ghost, because all of our friends were on that aircraft.
Right.
And his best friend in the whole world, Johnny Foss, was on that aircraft. And I could just see the brokenness in my brother walking up to me. And I knew, like, okay, this is real. Something really, really bad just happened. And the night and the deployment just got darker from that moment. So from your vantage point in the air, continue talking to us about, like, what was that like, what you felt, and now that you realize you got a fallen angel, what happens moving forward? Like you said, now you're going through the fallen angel checklist. Keep talking us through that experience.
Right. So I'm helping the nav with the fallen angel, the on-scene commander checklist, and The sensors, they're looking for any survivors at this point. And we're watching this helicopter just become more and more engulfed in flames. And we're seeing the secondary rounds being, popping off in all of it too, meaning, obviously heat combusts any kind of ammunition. And I recall one of the men who was face down next to the helo, we could see his body temperature change. And that was devastating because you can't do anything. You can't save anybody from that position where we were up in the air. We were trying to talk the Army Ranger unit or
Well,
element.
so you basically watched the life leave
Yeah,
this operator. You watched him go from having a warm signature to a cold signature.
right.
Wow.
And we had to report it back. I mean, the terrible thing about that night too is that our recording option for our video wasn't working. And it's added to the difficulties, right, in trying to provide information for this terrible incident. So after reporting back everything, the Army Rangers were talked onto obviously the crash or the shoot down spot. And from there, they were looking for any survivors too. Once they got onto target, we were also looking for anything that looked like what could have been a vantage point for someone to shoot an RPG from. And we found something. It was 100 meters away. It was this, turret looking thing, 3-story sandcastle that they would build essentially, and there was a man, 2 men in robes. One had a long cylindrical object again. And from that point on, I was like, let's light this up. And obviously we couldn't because it would have been a lot of collateral damage. Remember, Hearts and Minds campaign, you just can't, obviously, if you can't see the point of origin, technically, you can't start shooting. So I was just so angry though. No one was innocent in my mind. And it was awful to witness and have to just sit there then and take notes of activity that was happening around, and then just knowing that all of these men were gone, and we're basically now just circling and circling and circling until we finally were able to get some relief. And they actually had a gunship relieve us in daylight, which is unheard of usually because in a war zone, because as we know, one got shot down in the Gulf War. So we try not to do daytime operations. The cloak of darkness is our friend, right? So then we head back to base. Everything's completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. We land, and then we're sequestered to the day room in the operations center, which is the equivalent of like a living room that everybody kind of like gathers, and watches TV and relaxes usually. And now it's kind of like our prison. It's our cell, where we have to sit and think about all of that just happened. And none of us were talking. I mean, I think that some of the pilots were trying to like ask a few questions, within the group, but we all just, we didn't know the tragedy that awaited us. We didn't know that 31 Americans were killed. We didn't know that everyone piled onto that aircraft. It was 38 total that were killed, but for the American side, it was the largest loss of life in the history of the war. So we just sat in that room until 2 investigators came up and started asking us questions. And it wasn't as if they were worried about us. They were actually framing it so it made it seem that we were at fault. What did we not do that night?
Now, let me ask you, before those investigators started questioning y'all, did you feel any sense of responsibility for what happened, considering you were the fire control officer aboard the gunship that night? Or did
Absolutely.
that feeling, so you were already feeling some sense of responsibility before
Yeah.
this group came in and basically started trying to shift the blame onto you and the crew?
Right. No, in my mind, it was all my fault because, again, we are trained that everything that happens in that tactical orbit is our responsibility.
Okay, well, let me just say immediately, considering those were my friends aboard that aircraft, some of them I was really close with, and I was one of the ground force operators. It was not your fault. So if no one's ever told you that, I'm telling you right now. And those were my friends. I'll never
Right.
stop seeing their faces. I
Right.
miss them today. I'm going to miss them tomorrow. I'm going to miss them a year from now. And I'm telling you right now, that was not your fault. What happened had nothing to do with you, any responsibility that you held as a fire control officer. It had nothing to do with you as a person. It didn't speak to your competence in your role. It was just war, and
Right.
war happens. So if no one's ever said that to you, I'm saying it to you right now.
No, I really appreciate you saying that. I don't think anyone has ever said that to me out loud, other than my therapist. And I mean, I think maybe a select few people, but obviously, you being tied so intimately with all of that, it means a lot for me to hear that. And I've done a lot of work around this, right? So I think I was telling you before this interview, I don't know where my triggers, I don't know where my triggers still are. So thank you for saying that. I might need to
Of
take a
course.
break to wipe my eyes.
It's okay.
I'll be right back. I knew we were going to get into some stuff, but I didn't expect to cry. So thank you for that.
It's okay. It's okay. You take your time. This is a lot.
It is.
And this isn't the kind of experience that goes away, right? This is something that will stay with us for the rest of our lives until we see our friends again at some point. And I do believe that we will see them again at some point. And here's another thing that I believe with my entire heart. Not a single one of them think that what happened that night is your fault either. Not
Yeah.
a single one of them. I know it in my whole heart. They would never ever blame you for
Yeah.
what happened that night. It was just war.
Yeah.
That's it.
And war is hell. So,
War is hell. That's right. Yeah, so let that be a lesson to some of the people that are out there in the United States right now advocating for violence, advocating for some form of civil war, advocating for the senseless killings and assassinations of people simply because you don't agree with their viewpoint. You have no idea what you're asking for. You have no idea what you are asking us to get into. You have no idea what war actually feels like, and it is hell on earth. So put aside your delusions of grandeur. You had the opportunity to serve this country when the country needed you to stand up, volunteer, and serve. And for whatever reason, you missed out on that. Doesn't make you less of a person. Doesn't mean that you should spend the rest of your days fantasizing about what it would have been like to serve the country. But it should give you a reason to thank a veteran today for his or her service, and for you to go out and do something for a veteran. Like introduce them to someone that can help them to transition out of the military, or help them to get a job once they're out of the military, or someone that can help them to navigate post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. We do expect that of you. But anyway, moving on, with all of this being said, like obviously I got a lot more questions about what happened that night and why that happened. I'd like to hear from you, because there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of conspiracy around what happened that night when Extortion 17 was shot down. From your vantage point, what do you think people misunderstand the most about what happened that night?
I think that what was advertised in the media is that the QRF was sent in to help the Army Rangers that were pinned down when none of that ever happened. So I think that that was a ruse created in order to make it make sense. When at the end of the day, it was ego that was driving this mission. Because again, surface to air fire report, right? I mean, I wasn't a commander, but I would have never sent any of my people into a space like that unless I knew and I was okay with knowing that they were going to all die. If it was a suicide mission, that's completely different. This was unnecessary loss of life.
Yeah, look, I will say that I have actioned a lot of missions in that area, in the Tangi Valley, and it is extremely dangerous. And I can't think of one operation where we inserted right into the target area, especially knowing that there is a massive threat from surface to the air, and we're trying to insert in aircraft.
Right.
I can't remember one time where we were inserted directly on target, especially in that area. No, it was always an offset. We're landing someplace several kilometers away, and we're going to hike it all the way in, up and over the mountain if we have to, because we know there's significant chance that if we try to land on target, we're going to get shot out of the sky.
Right. And you knew that. So,
Absolutely.
and you weren't a commander. You know, it was obvious that these men were basically fed to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda. You know, it's just unfortunate that it happened in that way. And there's other conspiracy theories involving that because obviously we killed bin Laden. So it's like a pound of flesh for all of this flesh, you know, like here you go. Here's all of SEAL Team 6 in that space, you know, not all of SEAL Team 6, but for that team.
For sure.
And I've always had...
Yeah, and that's just a couple of them. Like I have heard several other conspiracy theories surrounding that event. Some of them are outlandish, sure, but some of them even caused me to go, dare I think about that for a little bit? Mm-hmm. You're not wrong with what you're saying. Doesn't mean that it's right and it's true and that's what happened, but I know you're not wrong. And even I still have questions. What questions do you still have? All this time has passed. All these years later, what questions do you still have?
I don't know if it's a question. It's just more of a statement that I hope that the ground force commander loses sleep every night. I hope that that man understands that because of his call that he made, a lack of allowing for us to take those two men out, that it trickled into this immense loss of life. And I hope that he loses sleep at night.
What was the emotional aftermath like for you after the mission? Like how do you even go through the rest of the deployment following that kind of experience?
I mean, this is such a layered question. I think that, you know, being questioned like we were guilty, like we didn't do our job, that we were at fault for the death of all of those men. Finding out that all of those men died on one aircraft, no one had split up. Then having to witness, so we got grounded when all of this happened, meaning we can't fly. So the sole reason why we're there, we now have that taken away from us. We were grounded for a week as this investigation was ongoing. And in that time frame, I don't know if you remember, but the storms were so bad. It was like God himself was crying of the whole incident, right? Like it was insane how much rain was happening. And I tried to volunteer to go and recover the bodies and they wouldn't let me. Because again, feeling at fault for it. And then when the time came for all of those men, their remains to be put in coffins, for those coffins to be draped with the American flag and the Afghanistan flag, respectfully for the 8 that died. To witness that, we were all in formation, given our different squadrons. I was in the front of mine. And I had to watch, at attention, all of these coffins being brought into this hangar on Bagram Air Base.
Yeah, I was there that day. I was one of the operators pulling my brothers off of that aircraft and into that hangar. We just didn't know one another at the time.
No. And I had the 10,000-foot stare. You know, I was staring through the operator that stood in front of me, obviously the pallbearers, you know, that brought these coffins in, caskets in, and then they would, not about face, but they would turn and stand at attention as well. And the ones that were standing at attention near me, like probably a couple feet away, I was just staring right through him. I can't remember what he looked like, but I had my buzz cut. You know, it wasn't about beauty over there. And also, I had to shave my head because I was part of the team. Once you have your first kill, like, it's, the women used to shave their eyebrows, or they would say their legs, and I'm like, what in the hell are you doing in between? Like, you know, I would hope that you were doing that anyways, but I was like, no, take it, you know, take my hair. I'm one of, you know, you guys. And so my crew shaved my head. And so that's what I was looking like, was just this vulnerable version of myself in a flight suit. And I lost it, like seeing all of those bodies in those caskets. I mean, just seeing all of the American flags was a sight that I can't even really put words to this day. And I think that it just hit me, and I had to take a knee. I had to go to the back of the formation because I felt lightheaded. I felt like I was just going to start crying. And I mean, I did. Like, I had to, like, just not be in front of all of it. And I don't remember the whole ceremony. I know that, you know, nice words were said about the men. And then I know that there was an imam that was brought in and did a prayer over the Muslim men. And I think that there's also controversy about that because people were able to get a recording of that, and apparently he was damning our men to hell in that prayer. And so I don't know, obviously I don't speak any of that language, so for me to hear that made me even more sick to my stomach, that, you know, that was even part of it.
Wow, to this day, I haven't heard that. And that's interesting and bothersome for a bunch of other reasons. So,
Right.
my goodness. Were you experiencing any feelings of guilt or anger or frustration or anything even entirely different at that moment, given you were watching our friends being walked off of that aircraft in flag draped coffins?
I think I just felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and grief that I've never felt before in my life, to the point where I wanted to just crawl out of my own skin. And then it immediately shifted to rage again, and I just wanted to be on every single mission that flew out that would be responsible for potentially killing the men that did this to the 31. And I was grounded, so I couldn't fly until we were given the all clear to do so. So when the investigation was up, when they finally decided, yeah, you guys aren't at fault, go ahead and, start flying again.
How long was that?
It was a week, but it was the
Okay.
longest week in my life, you know.
We were sort of grounded for, gosh, 2 to maybe almost 3 weeks, if I remember correctly, after that, because we were more so focused on recovering what was left of our friends, their items, figuring out how we could get them back home to their families, and
Right.
making sure we had recovered all of the equipment. So it was even 2 to 3 weeks before we were cleared hot to start operating again. And that felt like an eternity. Like you said,
Right.
we were all angry and we were very frustrated and ready to make someone pay for what they had done to our friends. So I empathize with you. Like it's almost like you're feeling helpless at that
Hmm.
point. Like I want to go do something about this, but I
Right.
can't.
But I can't. Right. So I think that in that aftermath, we got put on missions. Everything was just lay waste to everything. If it moved, kill it, was essentially where we were at. And obviously, we would confirm what it was before we would lay
Right.
waste to it. But I think that it was just more of a kill mission after that. And to my knowledge, they killed everyone involved that night. There's no one that survived, even from the bad guy side, So I remember hearing that, I think a year later, someone approached me in a chow hall in Qatar, and I was just sitting there by myself, and some guy, I guess he knew who I was, and sat down in front of me, and he said, just to let you know, we killed all of them. And then he got up and walked away, and
Mm.
I never knew who that was, but I just didn't, it still didn't really help because 31 men lost their life that night.
Right. How did that experience affect the rest of your Air Force career and your identity as a leader?
Significantly. I mean, everything changed. My whole trajectory of my life changed because when I witnessed what the government military is willing to do in order to just kind of like cover this whole thing up, like make it go away quickly. Because if you know how investigations work within the military, especially, it can take years for people
Hmm.
to have all the information, figure out what happened, to even a helicopter that goes down during peacetime, right? Maybe a year it'll take. And in a war zone, it was over in a month. I think General Colt was the one who wrapped it all up in a nice bow and presented it. And I remember when I got my hands on the redacted files because actually President Obama allowed for the families to have copies of the redacted files of everything that happened that night. And so, I definitely looked into the investigation that happened with the AC-130, was reading over everything, and I think that, again, they made it sound like the QRF went in because the Rangers were pinned down, because they needed to create a narrative that made sense. So
Mm.
even the investigative report was wrong. And that actually fueled me to take it to Congress because I actually ended up filing, finally, like a couple years later, an IG complaint against the whole thing. And the Inspector General of Hurlburt Air Force Base, he told me to take it to Congress. So I got in touch with my congressman from Florida, and James Zumwalt was the veterans liaison that worked for that congressman. And I got a hold of him. He had me come to Washington. I sat in front of two men. One, I think, was a SEAL, retired, and the other was a fighter pilot that was retired. And we walked through what I knew, the copies that I had, things that I had highlighted. And I'd also recreated imagery for myself to make it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked them through all of that. And then they asked me at the end, I remember them closing the folders, and they said, well, what do you expect to get out of this? And I said, answers for the families and for a fair shake at a proper investigation. And they said, well, we'll be in touch. And they never were. And it kind of went in the same lines of the congressional hearing that happened for Extortion 17. I wasn't invited to it. Who sat in it? Just members of Congress. No one that was actually there that night, that was overhead. They didn't think to bring in people for a hearing that could actually add to the conversation or paint maybe a better understanding for what went on. And because of that, I've also had a hard time with putting it to bed as well, because none of these men were done proper.
Yeah, I agree. If there's one truth that you want people to understand about that night, about the friends that we lost, the air support overhead, about what it really means to carry the weight of this kind of responsibility as a combat veteran, what is it? What is that one truth?
I think if you find yourself struggling with any kind of moral injury, holding on to any kind of guilt, survivor's guilt that you might have from anything in your life, be that combat veteran, be that civilian. I mean, people go through hell, and trauma can be trauma, nothing like combat, but, in its own way, not to minimize or catastrophize others. But I think if you're experiencing anything like that, to not blame yourself, to truly get the help that you need, to talk to somebody, seek out therapy. And as a therapist, I say that because talk therapy saved my life. I was suicidal as soon as I came back. People don't talk about redeployment. Redeployment is terrible. Redeployment destroys your soul, because especially if you don't have anybody catching you on the back end of it, right? Like, I wasn't married. I had just gotten divorced in 2007. So this happened in 2011, I'm by myself with all of this, feeling like I was at fault. I did all of this. I'm to blame. And yeah, I had suicidal ideations. I wanted to end that feeling. It was too much. It felt too much. And so I think that moving through that, I mean, the night that I was going to kill myself, I ended up talking to God. I always believed in God ever since I was 4, but I said, God, if you want me to be here, you're going to have my friend O answer the phone. And Onika and I, we were like best friends, but she was always busy. She never answered her phone when I first called her, that was just her.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of knew that she was going to be busy. I kind of wanted her to be busy. And that night she answered the phone immediately. She was just nonchalantly like, "What's up, girl?" And I'm like, so surprised, to hear her voice on the other end. And, I had told God, like, if she answered the phone, then I won't kill myself. And so I didn't, and I said, "Hey, can you come over?" And she came over, and it changed, I believe, the course of my life and my faith. And, from that moment forward, I started looking for answers. I started Googling things about Extortion 17, the 31 heroes. I wanted to know if anybody else still gave a shit about them. And it turned out that Billy Vaughn, who was a surviving father of Aaron Vaughn, he wrote a book called Betrayed. And I bought it and I read it, and he had redacted files. That's how I found out about the redacted files, was through his book. And I saw an email that was at the bottom, like the last page or something. And I said, you know what? I'm going to email them and I'm going to tell them how their son actually died, because they don't know. And so an email went to a phone call that was just, I probably sounded like I was a mess, because, I'm talking to Karen Vaughn, the mother of Aaron. She thought she knew how her son died, and I had to tell her otherwise. And I can't even imagine what the men or women that are tasked with having to knock on someone's door to tell them that their loved one has passed, how that job feels. That seems like it would be a gutting job, And for me, having to actually tell her, like, not only have you already heard that your son died and you witnessed, having to watch his casket come off, you had to bury him, but now, years later, you're having to relearn all of that. I can't imagine how that would feel, especially for people who are just hearing this for the first time, who probably have no idea how that night went.
For sure. Okay, my friend. I think that I think this is a good place for us to land the plane. I want to say thank you again for coming on the show and having what has been undoubtedly a very difficult conversation for you to have. These are not good memories that we have of our military career. We do have plenty of good memories from our military career, plenty
Right.
of them. Enough of them to outweigh and outshadow the bad experiences like the one we're talking about now. But
Right.
make no mistake, this has been a very difficult conversation for us to have, for you to have especially, I think.
Right.
So I want to be very, very thankful towards you again for being willing to come on the show and talk about this, because I also still have a lot of questions. I'm still angry. I just won't allow those feelings of sorrow, the survivor's remorse, the anger. I won't let them dictate how I live my life today.
Right.
And so, speaking of that, I want to wrap up with this question of healing. Like, how has that looked for you, if you've healed at all from this experience? Like, how have you taken that on?
It's been a long journey for me for healing, because I didn't actually get help. So I came back in 2011 after that horrible and tragic event. And then I didn't get help until 2017. I talked to a therapist in 2013 because I had to tell her that I can't eat any food, drink any water, like I'm not sleeping at night. So that was my intro to therapy, and also the start of my medical discharge. But after that, I didn't really have anyone to talk to. And it wasn't until the Boot Campaign, which is a veteran nonprofit that I'm now an ambassador for, they extended me an invitation to Texas to go through their program, which is incredible. I recommend it for every veteran that needs to have like a full body workup and just support in general. There's so many different facets of that nonprofit that make it absolutely wonderful, but that's for another day, that I can like go on and on about how they treat our veterans. But I was afforded a therapist through their program, and she basically taught me cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Through CBT, I was able to reframe my traumas and to flip the script in my mind of all that negativity that happened to now only owning what made sense. So it makes you reframe your negative thoughts. And as you're doing that, you're rewiring your brain. But in all that, I was no longer suicidal. I didn't have any of those feelings anymore. There was still something in me that felt like it needed to come out, to be purged, right? And I think that after I witnessed a friend of mine going through the Vet Solutions program that allows for the ibogaine treatment to happen, the psychedelic treatment therapy that people are going through. He went through that, and he went from being an emotionally abusive person to now having kindness. And I just felt like, wow, if it can change him like that, then what can it do for me? What's left in there still. Because I know I had a lot of hate in my heart still, for the whole incident. And so I went through it. I was one of 5 recipients. The rest were, I was only female. Went down there with a couple SEALs and EOD. And it was a beautiful experience. I think that the only thing, though, is I realized that now, years later, because that was 2021, right? I mean, I was kind of chasing redemption. Or salvation, right? Like I was trying to figure out how can I keep feeling better, right? Like I know there's still more things to purge. So then I went and did ayahuasca, 3 nights of that, like a year later in 2022, which I do not recommend, by the way. That is a very intense medicine. And then a year after that, I found myself doing MDMA with, all these are, with a shaman or with someone a practitioner that knows what they're doing. I never do these things recreationally. And again, don't recommend them. I think that what I learned the most out of this is that there is no shortcut to surrender or salvation. You have to feel to heal. You can't just take something and have it just purged out of your body or try to reconnect with yourself through something that has a shelf life.
Sometimes the only way out is through.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Joni. It means a lot. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. So here I am, licensed therapist for California, years later, loving where I'm at in life. And I think that knowing what I know, I would say 1,000% certainty that my spiritual pillar, being a human being, is now full because I start my day with reading the Bible and I end my day with giving thanks. And I just really I really hope that people can learn that there is more than just themselves out there. If anything, seek and ye shall find. If you don't want to be alone, if you don't want to be alone anymore, God has you. Give him a chance.
Amazing. Joni, tell the audience where they can learn more about you. Where can they find, more information about the work that you're doing now that you've moved on from the Air Force and this experience?
Sure. I mean, I'm on Psychology Today. I'm on LinkedIn. I answer everybody. I'm not, that person. It's not like I need a administrator or assistant or anything. So, and I'm not too good to, reach back. I think that for me, connection is everything. So I appreciate people that are willing to have a conversation. I welcome it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, my friend, for taking the time to come on the show today and share with myself and the audience the experience that you gained from that situation, the knowledge that you gained from it, the growth that you gained from surviving such a horrible situation. And thanks for just sharing our story with the audience. I'm sure that they will find value in it and even more understanding of what it is that military members, veterans, law enforcement, first responders, what it is that we go through on a daily basis.
Right.
When we get up, don a uniform and raise our hands and say, hey, send me, I'll go. Someone's got to do this. So I
Right.
really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your friendship. I love you. I miss you, my friend. You are a real hero. And I'll talk to you soon.
It's good to see you.
Thanks.
Take care.
If today's conversation brought up anything difficult for you, or if someone you know is struggling, call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Help is available 24/7. You don't have to go through this alone.